Hello everyone, my name is Ria Jamnadas and I would like to welcome you to this webinar where we will be discussing the topic of whether clean energy is critical to the success of 5G. So welcome to all of our listeners. Before I introduce our presenters and panelists, just a few logistics. Firstly, all of you will be in listen-only mode. If you do need to contact us at any point throughout the webinar, please just type a comment in the box as indicated on the left. We do also encourage you to ask us any questions throughout the session that we'll hopefully get to in the Q&A that we have at the end. But if your question isn't addressed during the live discussion, then we will share a document afterwards providing some answers to those questions. We'll also send you the presentation slides and also a recording from today shortly after the session. So please do feel free to distribute to your colleagues or anyone else who you think might be interested. And finally, if you're on Twitter, please reach out to us at STL Partners. So now I'm delighted to welcome all of our presenters and panelists. As I said, I am Ria, I'm a consultant at STL Partners and I will be moderating the discussion today. Also from STL, we have Phil Laidler. Phil is Consulting Director and also a partner at STL, and he will be doing a presentation for us shortly. We also have my colleague Matt, who is a consultant at STL and will be joining the discussion and Q&A session. We'll also be hearing a presentation from Scott Armel, who is Vice President for Global DC Power and Outside Plant at Virtiv. And we're also delighted to welcome Nilmar Sekamandi David, who is Head of Network and Systems Infrastructure at Telefonica, and will be joining us for the Q&A and panel discussion. So just a quick rundown of the agenda. Firstly, we'll be hearing from Phil, who will be giving us a bit of an overview of some of our recent research that we've done, focusing on the 5G energy emissions challenge. Next, we'll be hearing from Scott on the 5G Deployment Balancing Act, and then we'll move on to the panel and Q&A that will involve all of our presenters and panelists. So without further ado, I will hand over to my colleague Phil to kick us off with the 5G Energy Emissions Challenge.
Thank you, Ria. So what I'm going to do is run through very quickly a summary of the report we produced with Virtiv and published about a month ago. And I encourage you to go and download this report. You can get it from Virtiv's website. There's a long version in English, and then there is a shorter version in English as well as these other languages. So please, if you're interested, you like what I'm going to present, do go and pull off the report that's available from Virtiv. First, just to kick off, for those of you who are not familiar with STL Partners, one of the things we sort of frame a lot of what we do is in terms of what we call the coordination age. I'm just going to explain this. What our observation is that telecoms, over 100 years ago, 150 years ago, set out to solve the problem of distance between individuals. So allowing people to connect remotely to each other. And really overcome the distance problem. Since the 1990s, with the internet and with smarter mobile telephony, we've kind of entered what we would call the information age. And that's much more about giving access to content and for entertainment and for reducing transactions. And what we're arguing is we're now entering a new age, which we've coined the coordination age. And in the coordination age, we're saying that there's a new role for telecoms operators. It's not just connecting, and it's not just connecting people and content and people with each other. It's also connecting many things, devices, sensors, actuators, and it's much more about coordinating those things and coordinating the processes and the world around us. And that in this, the operators have a need to go beyond the role of connectivity and to play more of a role in enabling that coordination. And we'd argue that just as the value went from communications into information, the value is now moving from information to coordination, and operators need to follow that value. So that's the context, that's our kind of the 20,000-foot strategic view. At the same time, we observe that globally as a planet, we are seeing increasing demands on limited resources. We want to increase availability to employment, healthcare, to populations globally. We also need to be more efficient with the resources that we have in terms of productivity, our use of energy and water and land and distributing food, but we also need to conserve what we have on the planet. And these are real underlying pressures that we need to solve globally. So the coordination age is also there to address these concerns. And that's part of the vision. And on the next slide, you see it's no coincidence that 5G really has been conceived to meet that need and that potential. Not only does 5G have all of these latencies and bandwidth and capabilities and fancy slicing to tailor the needs of applications specifically, but it's also been designed to be far more programmable, to be far more cloud-like, and to evolve. So it's a G that's going to be a lot more evolutionary, because it's going to be a lot more software based, and that means that it won't be so much a one-off generational change. It will continue to evolve as we implement it. So that's the kind of the scenario we set of the global challenges, the role of telecoms within the coordination, and 5G. And 5G, we projected this, and you'll find similar projections on the internet, but we projected the data traffic from 5G is set to continue growing, partly because of the new role that it's fulfilling and the countless connections that it's going to be meeting, and that it will continue to drive growth that we've seen already in telecommunications. And by 2025, we reckon that globally, 5G traffic volumes will overtake the existing traffic volumes on 3 and 4G networks. And actually, by the time we get to 2027, the additional increment will be equal to what the total capacity is today. So the increment on the 5G, the annual addition to 5G, will be equal to our total network being delivered today. So there's huge traffic, and this presents a challenge, clearly, because although this is a great thing, we see some real challenges. On the plus side, 5G can help to curb excess energy and the associated emissions because it's vastly more efficient than 4G. In fact, the per bit transmitted, it's 90% more. And in fact, Telefonica recently produced a report confirming this in the field trial. So it is fundamentally, once it's loaded up, it's a lot more efficient than 4G, and it will continue to improve. There's also greater opportunity to turn up and down the 5G network so that they don't have to be, the lights don't have to be on the whole time. Virtualization, as I mentioned, means that we're going to get more continuous improvement, both in terms of hardware and software, and there's more opportunity to share resources between operators, and arguably there's a clearer route to decommissioning the existing legacy networks. So there's a lot that 5G can do to help curb, but there are still challenges in how it's deployed. And if it's not deployed well, this huge growth in traffic could end up undermining this performance improve that we've mentioned there. Also, because it's a higher spectrum, you need a lot more cell sites, and that increases the embedded carbon, but it also increases that coverage requirement does put pressure on energy and emissions. The other thing worth mentioning is that a lot of the network functions are going to run on cloud native, on COTS hardware, so it'll be cheaper, standardized servers, but they do require specific environments around cooling and around power, and that has to be implemented with care, particularly because many of these environments are going to be highly distributed edge data centers and outdoor cabinets that need, and in some cases they'll be converting from 4G sites. So there are some opportunities, but there are some big challenges, and it'll be really critical that we do this right with best practice in this critical age. So what we're seeing in the next decade, on the next slide, you've got two things happening. You've got the rollout of 5G, and you've got this huge transition to low carbon economies. And it's a kind of coincidence, but it's a coincidence that we need to embrace, because we think we're going to see increased pressure, both from regulators, but also from advocacy groups. We're seeing more and more advocacy groups taking action where they feel that companies are not doing enough to address their energy and emissions. You're also going to see it mounting costs, because the energy costs will be considerable, but there are also lots of costs associated with poor energy management. And finally, and perhaps most critically, our stakeholders are going to really start to take their business elsewhere. So be it employees, be it our customers, and we'll show you some of the research on that, be it our investors, they're all going to be more demanding in terms of they want to see real evidence that we as an industry are doing more to reduce our emissions, as well as enables others a reduction in emissions. So our kind of the key hypothesis, the key argument that we make in the report is that rather than try to mitigate the challenge, that operators need to take this as an opportunity by introducing best practice in 5G networks. So we'll hear a lot in the rest of today's webinar about best practice. You can actually bring credibility and insight in bringing those new services, that coordination age vision to your customers. And it's not necessarily just to help customers with their energy emissions, it's to help them with all of their optimization journeys, with all of their transformation journeys. But you have to bring that credibility. And the research we showed is that increasingly customers, particularly enterprise customers, but consumers as well, expect to see that from their operators. So that creates a virtuous loop around learning and new demand. And we argue that operators need to see this as a virtuous loop. And you have to be doing both. You have to be practicing what you preach and also preaching what you practice, and driving that loop, and embrace this as part of your underlying strategy in how you go forward. And that's really what the paper argues. We go into a great deal of detail. So I'm not going to spend too long now, just to say that we set out many examples, and you're going to hear lots from Nilma and from Scott today, of best practice in the network, best practice in the sort of the passive infrastructure around the network, how that's managed, the way you organize yourself, the way that you incentivize and reward the company for doing the right thing, and also how you work with others across the ecosystem. So we've across these, we've given lots of concrete examples, and the good news, there's loads to be done. There's a lot of opportunity here. There are many things that can be done, and today we're going to have some of those. On the flip side, the other side of the equation, on the next slide, we see that we did a survey of 500 companies globally, and we asked them, what is it that they would look for from a telco to reduce their carbon emissions? And they're looking, yes, they're looking for evidence, and they're looking for evidence that best practice is being conducted, and they're also looking for more information about how much carbon is coming from the service. So when we see this pretty much about all of them, we actually, for some reason, we haven't got the North America in here, but I can confirm that North American is pretty much the same as the other regions. So, do read the report, do take a look at it. There's a lot more breakdown from there, and I do encourage you to go through it and listen, obviously, to the other examples that the presenters will take. In summary, don't see 5G as a constraint, see it as an opportunity. Embrace the coordination age, implement best practice, adopt and drive best practice, get the company behind it. Don't just set a target, but also senior management translate what's a high level commitment, which is great, it's a great start, but translate that into governance and practical management so that it's driven throughout the organization. We're going to hear some examples from Nilma, how Telefonica has done that, and be your best case study. So I'd like to now hand over to Scott, who's going to take us through some more concrete examples of where Virtiv has seen operators getting this balancing act right and really putting best practice into play in 5G.
Yeah, appreciate it, Phil. Thank you very much. And I'd encourage you guys, use the question box and submit your questions, because much of this webinar, we'll barely have a chance to scratch the surface of a lot of the detail that's in the report that STL Partners has put together. So tremendous amount of data and insight here that we found really interesting. As Virtiv, just want to give you guys a quick view of who we are. Next slide, please. We're the critical infrastructure guys. So global platform of large infrastructure, think AC power UPSs, DC power systems, outside plant enclosures, thermal management solutions, all the way down to the IT and rack equipment, with solutions capability in the integrated modular space, as well as the modular rack space, all wrapped with a world-class services and support function. We're about 4.4 billion in sales, 20,000 employees, covering customers globally across 130 customers. So we want to be telecom operators and communication service providers, critical partners in developing solutions for 5G and attacking a lot of these challenges. Ria, next slide, please. So a lot of what Phil highlighted is we recognize as Virtiv, we have a unique position in seeing a lot of the challenges that operators are trying to deal with related to infrastructure, related to network rollouts, and some of the trade-offs and difficult questions that face them. That it's easy for us to talk about energy and efficiency and saving the planet in its own bubble. But realistically, there are a whole slew of trade-offs and opposing forces that are pulling on operators as they think about how to compete, how to win customers, and how to advance next generation networks and services, knowing that they have to have a business, they have to have a sustainable model, and they have to have customers that are willing to buy what it is we're building. So for us, 5G rollouts and deployments, it's a huge balancing act. How do we measure and balance between first cost of deployment, budgets at the regional or operating level, first costs, reliability of the network, versus some of the more ambitious sustainability targets around efficiency, energy consumption, OpEx, the total cost of ownership piece, as well as some semblance of understanding that we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we don't know where some of this technology is going to go. So building in some flexibility and some future proofing to the things that we're rolling out now. The chart on the right here, I took away from the report as a very almost diametrically opposed types of pulls on an operator. On the one hand, rising OpEx costs and rising energy costs present an enormous challenge, but also at the end of the day, when a customer is choosing their internet or their wireless service, the things that are most top of mind, cost, reliability, and performance, don't always align perfectly with sustainability objectives. And that's a real tough set of trade-offs and a dilemma for many operators to wrestle through. The interesting thing here is, while it's fourth on the list, the fact that carbon efficiency and the carbon footprint and energy usage of an operator made the list shows that from a consumer perspective, this is actually top of mind, and those things actually do influence the cost of services, the reliability of services, the performance of services. So our takeaway from a lot of this is it's not an either-or proposition. Many of these things are interrelated, and many of these things are symbiotic, and it doesn't have to be a mutually exclusive set of decisions operators are making. As Virtiv, we want to help get into the details of some of those things to help to lay a path forward and work together to solve a lot of these problems. Next slide, please. So from our perspective, Phil already hit on this. We can go a touch deeper into each of these. Obviously, Virtiv doesn't play much in the specific radio or network technology perspective, but we can leverage a lot of data center best practices here that can apply to telecom as well, specifically around new technologies that are being rolled out. One of the best practices we have seen many operators deploy is avoiding an if you build it, they will come mentality to 5G rollouts, and working more directly with end customers and end operators, be it industry, hospitals, healthcare, enterprise, in trying to define what those use cases and applications are, tuning the network equipment to best meet that application, and then building the most efficient critical infrastructure around those solutions before you roll out. Helps avoid waste, helps optimize efficiency, and helps encapsulate some of those things. From our perspective, facilities infrastructure, it's easy for us to say to always choose the most high efficient and best technology in your point products and point solutions. But a lot of times those things are disconnected from other people's goals within the network. If someone is measured on network deployment speed or rollout or points of presence coverage, or another group is measured on maintaining their budget while still hitting deployment milestones, efficiency solutions may take a backseat in some of those things. So it's important to always be pushing and leveraging that low-hanging fruit where you can. From an infrastructure management perspective, it's surprising to us, in another area where there's a benefit from blending data center and telecom best practices. Telcos have been reluctant to connect at a very deep level of detail to equipment that is dispersed out in the field for security reasons, for cost reasons, for what have you, to really truly unpack the energy dilemma and understand where your usage is, where your trouble spots. Connectivity to your network and your physical infrastructure is paramount. And then the last two things to me are foundational and really carry a lot of weight. One is the organization and evaluation. A lot of what we just talked about. An organization or an operator can pose very ambitious energy and efficiency targets. If those targets and that mindset and culture don't make it down to very tangible goals at the working group level, supply chain, procurement, network standards, the product scoping groups, if those guys aren't incentivized or very well aligned to the high level corporate objectives, you're running on a treadmill and you never make any progress. So that's critical and key. And then a shameless, selfless plug for Virtiv, working with others. An operator can't do this alone, nor should they try, because there's insights to be pulled from a variety of different industries and a variety of different areas. From a Virtiv perspective, we think we have an interesting history in understanding the install base and the decisions that were made in rolling out networks from 2G to 3G to 4G, and now layering on top of 5G. And we bring an interesting perspective in understanding how best to migrate legacy infrastructure into the new age to both optimize and drive the best efficiency. So leverage partners and leverage expertise and ask for help as much as possible, and truly building that partner ecosystem puts you on the best footing to make sure that all of your constituencies and contingencies have a voice and some skin in the game as we try to roll out these improvements. Next slide, please. I'll quickly hit here just a couple of realistic case studies. I know it's easy for us to point to point solutions. Virtiv has recently rolled out a portfolio of super high efficiency, 98% efficient rectifiers that are leveraging GaN technology and a lot of cutting edge stuff. They cost more. They cost more than our standard efficiency rectifiers that we've been shipping in high volume for years. But the financials are making sense if you actually take a chance to look at the network holistically. You look at total cost of ownership. This specific example happens to be an Asia Pac example where the operator is dealing with very high energy costs, 30 cents a kilowatt in some of their locations across 6,000 sites. Even if you have that rate, the financials and the payoff of implementing some of the best technology available at a point solution, while more expensive from a first cost perspective, can significantly pay off. This operator saved $7 million a year in annual operating expense, 23 gigawatt hours of energy consumption, and over 13,000 tons of CO2 production by prioritizing the higher efficient version of power conversion in their systems for their access and wireless sites. So a modest 4% savings in energy and efficiency can cascade out to some real tangible benefits when you look at the scale of this operator. Next slide, please. The other area we talk about quite a bit at Virtiv is obviously with the onset of virtualization, the introduction of IT and computing into 5G, both in the core network and the access space, as well as the edge space to truly make this work. There's a lot of, I'll call it non-native telco equipment that's going to be coming in to make this work. I hinted at this a little bit, but the solutions capability that we bring as Virtiv, encapsulating and enclosing and kind of segregating off very high density IT stacks that may be coming in to enable next generation networks, and not trying to push, I'll call it non-native types of IT equipment into the telco footprint, can truly help to both package up a solution and to make sure that you're not over deploying or over provisioning a brownfield site or a legacy telecom site as you're trying to shepherd in new equipment. So this particular solution that we worked on is contained rack with its own contained high density cooling solutions, connectivity and monitoring. So as the new technology that's used to enable an edge site for 5G is coming on board and it's being validated and implemented, you're not having to build out an entire facility. You can build this in chunks or piece parts that allows you to both contain that load and then scale as you grow. So tremendous ability to apply very, very low PUE levels to specific applications that allows a lot of flexibility and future proofing and growth planning. So just a couple of examples of how we can make it work and how leveraging partners that are kind of looking at the bigger picture can help make these things pay off. So next slide, please. So finally, just to bring it all back together, I'll tee this up as we get asked a lot kind of best practices and what operators are doing really good things in terms of balancing the energy equation with still maintaining best costs, maintaining reliability, putting out a world-class network. And I'm excited to turn it over to Nilmar here in a second, because Telefonica has done some really incredible things in driving this industry forward. And we're very proud to call them a partner across many fields of infrastructure and development. Just to hit on briefly some of the things I know we'll talk about, as a company, 7 terawatt hours of energy consumption per year. I don't have specific numbers, but likely well in excess of $1 billion a year spent on energy consumption across the footprint, across Latin America, Europe, and in other pockets. it's a huge base to work from, but it's also a huge challenge as we think about deploying 5G with radios that are in many instances 2x the heat dissipation and the energy load of previous generations. By taking a concerted effort towards cascading objectives down to the working level, ensuring that value is placed on energy consumption and total cost of ownership in product bids and network rollout RFIs and RFQs and tenders. Over the last 10 years, they have made meaningful and significant progress towards both offsetting the impact of these higher energy consuming rollouts, as well as putting the entire company and culture on a footing to make this top of mind and make it a priority. We're proud to work with Telefonica in a lot of the energy savings as a service initiatives they have had. One of the unique models that we've worked with a customer in making sure that us as a vendor community who generates sales and profitability by selling more product has some skin in the game with Telefonica in their initiatives to focus our product sales on them achieving energy reductions and savings at a site level. And those types of things where our incentives are aligned on the same side of the table can be very beneficial in creating solutions and thinking outside of the box and rolling out different ways of doing things as we tackle this challenge together. So next slide, please. And last for me is just to bring it all back together for kind of how Virtiv plays. It's not an either or proposition. 5G rollouts are absolutely a balancing act that come with a tremendous amount of uncertainty and trade-offs that an operator has to make. I think it's easy to dismiss and say energy needs to be top of mind, but there's a whole bunch of competing forces here, and we recognize that. The single biggest thing I can push is cascading those objectives out to every part of the organization and having those things show up in the working relationship with operators and vendors and partners across OEMs, critical infrastructure, real estate, physical infrastructure, and the like. And then clearly prioritizing point solutions, working with partners, and trying to make sure that those objectives are top of mind for everybody as we're working towards these things puts an operator on the best footing forward to try to make meaningful progress towards energy and the challenge that gets faced. So excited to hear more from Nilmar and the rest of the panel in unpacking this, and excited to hear your questions. So please submit them.
Great, thank you very much, Scott. And yeah, I'll just echo that. So we'll move on to the panel discussion now, but after that we will move on to some questions from the Q&A. So please do submit your questions over the next few minutes, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. But just to kick off the panel discussion, I think, Nilmar, I'll start with a couple of questions for you, since we're very excited to have Telefonica on here to share your perspective. The first question that I have is, how do you decide between energy versus emissions as being the target of your 5G sustainability efforts?
That's a good question. Energy or emissions. At Telefonica, we believe that both are important, but the emissions are our main focus. We have 5 public goals, 2 of them being target at energy, and 3 at emissions. Our first target is about energy efficiency. We want to reduce energy consumption by 90% per traffic unit by 2025 as compared to 2015. It's a 10 years view. Until last year, we reduced our energy consumption by 81% per traffic unit. And how did we achieve this? Well, by implementing as many energy projects as we possibly could. We just update our 2020 numbers this week. And in the last 10 years, we saved €1 billion or 7 gigawatt hours of energy. It means we saved the equivalent of the annual energy consumption of a country such as Luxembourg or El Salvador. Our second target is about renewable energy. we would like to we would like our electricity sources to continue coming from 100% renewable sources in our main markets in Brazil, Germany, Spain, and the UK. We already been using renewable energy for about 2 years. Our third target is about our emissions. I think this is our most important target. We want to achieve a net zero carbon emissions by 2025 in consideration to scopes 1 and 2. In the last 5 years, we have reduced our emissions by 61% and more than 1 million tons of CO2 per year, basically by reducing our energy consumption and using clean energy. Our fourth target is about our vendors' emissions, the scope 3. Basically here, we would like to reduce CO2 emissions in our value chain by up to 39% by 2025. Our fifth and final target is about our customers' emissions. Is something new because we wanted to help our customers to reduce their emissions by 5 million tons annually through connectivity and our eco smart services. As you have heard, we have not one, but 5 targets set to improve energy conservation and all-round emissions. And most importantly, our targets are aligned with the ambitions of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we were certified by Science Based Target Initiative. This is something about our targets.
Great, thank you very much, Nilmar. And one more question that I have for you is, obviously Telefonica has gone from having this kind of aspiration and commitment to clean energy to actually developing a real culture that has seen a change in behaviours. So could you just share some of the kind of key success factors in being able to make that transition from an aspiration to a culture, and how Telefonica has gone about achieving that?
Well, the simple answer, working a lot with the best team and as a team. Firstly, I would like to highlight that Telefonica started its global energy efficiency program more than 15 years ago. And in 2008, we create our climate change office. Secondly, we achieve this climate change culture by involving everyone from all areas of our company, such as experts from operations, environmental, financial, legal, etc. I'm here representing these people, many people from different operations. We operate in 12 different countries across Europe and Latin America. And every single day, we further discussing better ways to practice energy efficiency and involve everyone. Our goals are not from one leader, but from all Telefonica employees. Next, we want to involve our vendors as part of our climate change team. Companies like Virtivs help us to find new and innovative ways to be more efficient. For example, every year for more than 10 years, we have organized an energy and climate change workshop with more than 200 people, ranging from our employees to more than 30 vendors. Also, our top executives then realized that us, the industry, needs to help the global warming crisis. In order to make a change, we must all contribute, from government, industry, again, like us, and even our citizens. And finally, regarding the first question, it is important that we all share a common goal. I think Scott also mentioned it before. Here at Telefonica, all employees have a part of their salary linked to sustainable targets such as energy and emissions, as I have mentioned before. This is how we create a climate change culture within our company.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Nilmar. Scott, a couple of questions for you. So the first thing, I guess, if you could, kind of touch on some of the things that you've already mentioned, but in your experience, what are 3 key things that operators should do when they're approaching their 5G rollout in order to maximize energy efficiency and reduce emissions?
Yeah, that's good. And we touched on quite a bit of this, and I think Nilmar highlighted some things as well, is making sure you know what you're trying to accomplish as you roll out is top of mind. Are you shooting for best-in-class reliability, best-in-class efficiency, best-in-class deployment speed, or some combination of all of the above? Making sure that the product standards group, the procurement group, the folks that are running a supply chain tender all have the same objectives and goals in mind keeps things in sync. For me, like, do the work of understanding the total cost of ownership. It's very easy to put a bid out to the vendor community to say, what's the price for me to roll out XYZ? And you go with the low price wins without realizing the total package. What does it cost me to deploy? What does it cost me to rip and replace the existing infrastructure? What is it going to cost me in ongoing battery maintenance or thermal management maintenance? What's the total price of kind of the energy consumption over the 10-year life of the equipment we're rolling out? Doing the work of understanding kind of the total cost paints a very different picture in many instances that present different challenges and different trade-offs and hurdle rates for procurement and finance and technology folks. So doing the work and getting the detail around total cost of ownership of any initiative or any project is key. And then the third thing I would say is I'm fully realize I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth here, but when you deal with an operator that has tens of thousands of sites or locations, consistency in the product or the IT block or the solutions that are being deployed, the more you can have those be common and the more you can have those be repeatable, allows you to take best practices and scale them in a way that allows you to roll up a lot of savings and efficiency. At the same time, you have to recognize that when you're dealing with countrywide or continent-wide deployments, the environment in Tunisia is different than the environment in Germany. It's very different than the environment in the US in terms of weather, sunlight, solar availability, risk of things like security and theft on the equipment. So all of those things have to play in, and working with an operator to best tailor solutions for the rollout to the environment and to the area that you're in can pay tremendous dividends. From something as simple as using compressor-based cooling for a solution here versus the availability of free air, implementing solar solutions as an augment or a peak shaving mechanism to a cell site in India or in North Africa, has a different runway and economic model than maybe it does in the rural parts of America. Things like that. So there's detail and discussion to be done at the point level. And the operators that are doing it very well are considering all three of those things, and they're putting it into their actions and behavior as they engage with us as Virtiv, and we see that.
Great, thanks, Scott. And Matt, just a question for you, probably before we move on to the Q&A, but why does this matter now when companies have been under pressure to act on energy issues for years now?
Yeah, thanks, Ria. Well, I just think it's really important to remember the context that this is set in. And Phil kind of touched on this at the beginning of his presentation, but telco revenue growth is stagnating as we move into this coordination age, which we define as STL partners. And when we move into this coordination age, there's going to be this growing need for resource efficiency, as Phil kind of highlighted. But this will be enabled by new technologies. And this is why 5G is so crucial for operators and why this is quite like a crucial crossroads with regards to energy as well. 5G presents this opportunity to identify new business models and kind of spur on innovation as well. But then the issue that we have is at the same time, it will lead to this massive increase in data traffic volumes. So there's this growing need for efficiency. So that's why this is such an important moment, because on the one hand, there's this opportunity to create new revenue growth, which is what telcos need to do. But then on the other hand, there's this sustainability challenge and the fact that sustainable deployment and operation is actually needed to really protect telco bottom lines moving forward, for the reasons that Phil kind of touched on in his presentation and that we go into more detail in the report. So I think that's why this is such a crucial moment, because the introduction of 5G, and as it gets deployed around the world, I guess it can kind of act as an inflection point, not just for telco revenue growth, but also for carbon emissions. An inflection point in different directions. But I think that's why this is such an important moment.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. So I will move on to the Q&A now, and just another reminder, if you do have questions, to submit them. And even if we can't answer them during this live session, we will do our best to get back to you offline. But the first question that we have, Nelmar, is directed towards you. So regarding the energy consumption of 5G, has Telefonica deployed 5G sites, and what has been the energy impact from those?
Yes, we have 5G live in Telefonica, both using DSS, dynamic spectrum sharing, anchored by 4G, and also in C-band, where we have spectrum available. We launched our first 5G network in the UK in 2019. And then in Brazil in July, Spain in September, and Germany in October of last year. We used these networks to measure the actual energy consumption of 5G and prepare a study based on the equipment we have installed. Our conclusion is the same as Phil presented before, which is that 5G is up to 9% more efficient than 4G per traffic unit. The study was based on 5G in C-band, because while using DSS, the energy consumption is quite the same as 4G. Basically in this study, we measure the 5G energy consumption using equipments from many vendors, such as Huawei, Ericsson, and Nokia, in many different traffic scenarios. The energy consumption in 5G increased because we have a new active component, the MIMO, the massive MIMO antennas. It is set to increase traffic dramatically, but we can confirm that the energy consumed did not rise as many suspect it would. In addition, we used the new power saving features for 5G, and it demonstrated a potential saving of between 20 and 30% during low traffic hours. Of course, this is our conclusion for now, because the vendors have released new hardware, and of course, new power savings features are available. And we, of course, are planning to repeat this study soon.
Great, thank you, Nilmar. Another question that we have, I think, Phil, if you could take, do you think that with 5G, the total energy consumption will grow, and by how much?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think if I'm interpreting this correctly, the question is, does the overall energy and emissions from networks or mobile networks increase or decrease with the implementation of 5G? And based on the modeling we've done, it looks like it's a timing question. So I think initially it does increase energy, and of course, depending on the mix of energy, it may also increase emissions from scope 2, in other words, from using of that energy. And obviously, it will also increase embedded emissions when you first implement it. But then we think that as more and more traffic moves on from 4G to 5G, and that 90% saving that Nilmar mentioned starts to take traction, because you start loading up the 5G network, you start to benefit from the MIMO efficiencies, massive MIMO efficiencies, then it starts to flatten out and come down. So it's really a question of timing. And we've modeled this extensively, and we think that if you do it right, and if it's rolled out efficiently, and if it's done in a balanced way, and relatively quickly, by the way, you can get your ongoing energy usage to start coming down probably around sort of 2 to 3 years after you've got to sort of 75% coverage. So the overall impact, I would say, is it will reduce energy, and of course, if you have more and more renewables, it will also reduce emissions. And I think there's broad consensus. We did a poll just last week, and nearly half of those responding felt that by 2025, the net impact of 5G would be to reduce energy across all European countries of mobile networks. Long question, but yes.
Great, thanks, Phil. Another question that we have, think back to you, Nilmar, is when it comes to clean energy, obviously investments will need to be made. So how do you use the business case to justify those investments? How do you factor in CapEx considerations?
Well, as a telecom company, we have many kinds of investments to make, such as fiber, 4G, 5G, new operation systems, and many more. Clean energy is, of course, included in the investments we make. We invest almost 16% of our annual revenue. This is the traditional way to use the local investment, but we know that it's not enough, and we have to be innovative to implement as many projects as possible. The first change we made was by creating a specific CapEx line from our global unit to sponsor energy efficiency projects. My team is responsible for managing this CapEx, and each operator presents the project to us. We evaluate it technically and financially. Then we transfer this CapEx to the OB, to the operator, and then they implement the project. It is mandatory that the return of investment is less than 3 years, and we have already invested more than 60 million euros in the last 5 years. But we know that it's not enough, And we have other projects, name it ESAS, Energy Savings as a Service. In this model, a specialized company, specialized vendor, designs a solution to reduce energy consumption. They invest in it and they operate and maintain. The payment is based by sharing the energy savings, and we already have vendors using this model, such as Virtiv. We implemented this model in one of our main data centers in Spain, Concepcion, and we reduced the energy consumption by 25%. Finally, with regards to renewable energy, we are using power purchase agreement, which are long-term contracts whereby a vendors builds solar power and wind farms. It is more common to have PPA off-site, such as here in Spain, we have a large PPA with Acciona, but we also have PPA on-site. These are the ways we are implementing or financing energy projects.
Great, thank you, Nilma. So another question that we've had from Wadi, I think hopefully Scott you can take, and it is, are operators in the Middle East taking energy efficiency into consideration when they're deploying 5G? And if so, can you give some examples of countries or operators?
Certainly. Throughout Middle East and North Africa, it's interesting. Obviously, solar is plentiful in many of those locations, and also in many instances, a lot of the access points within the network are either in remote areas or off-grid or less stable grid scenarios. So one of the things we've seen is a huge focus decades ago of making sure that those sites were operated and supported by both grid and diesel gensets. And diesel gensets were being used as kind of normal course of operation. We've seen tremendous uptake and interest in what we call our hybrid power solutions. So leverage of multiple sources of input to a power system with a large bank of often lithium-ion batteries for storage. So think grid plus diesel generator and then add solar to the site. Solar has a tremendous potential to both reduce diesel and grid usage at many of these remote sites. And in a place like the Middle East, where we've deployed hundreds, if not thousands of solutions in this way, a solar panel does double duty. And it both cools and shades the equipment at the base of a tower while generating power. Our DC power systems at Virtiv can interchangeably slot in rectifiers or solar MPPTs that allow pretty seamless and interchangeable use in addition of solar to a base plant. You pair that with a battery backup system that can hold long durations of power and as well as handle a lot of cyclic or duty cycles like lithium-ion batteries, and now all of a sudden you have the ability to both produce during peak and store in off times, and then level out the demand at many of these sites. So we are seeing Middle East operators paying attention to it. I would say it's less about being green, if you will, and more about high efficiency and better kind of emissions types of solutions, just truly helping operations and helping lower the footprint and offsetting a lot of legacy baggage of like having to transport diesel to a site or having to rely on less reliable grid connections. So that's part of what we referred back to is it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. A lot of these things can be both beneficial to your green footprint, your energy usage, as well as help offset some of the network challenges that we see.
Thanks, Scott. And we've had a good question come in from Marco, which is, what can governments and regulators do to ensure the efficiency gains offered by 5G are maximised? Perhaps Nilma, you could take that question.
Sorry, Ria, could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What can governments and regulators do to ensure the efficiency gains offered by 5G are maximised?
Well, I I think we are seeing in Europe a lot of initiatives to improve energy efficiency and to set ambitious goals. And I think Europe are playing a good job on it. We are close to some organizations also to define common goals for all operators. And also I'm seeing a good collaboration within our operators and industry to share best experiences. I mean, we have a presence in 12 of different countries, and we share our experience in these 12 countries. But now we are sharing a lot of experience between us, between operations, between industry. I think, of course, the government is part of it, but I think we are prioritizing emissions as one of the top of important things in our projects, not just in Telefonica, but in other operators.
Yeah, great, thank you. And another question I think that I'll direct towards you, Matt, is should telcos be implementing these policies on brownfield deployments or just on greenfield deployments like 5G?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think the problem is that for many parts of 5G networks, they're going to be deployed mostly at existing telco sites, so on top of existing infrastructure. So the opportunity for any sort of true greenfield deployments aren't really that numerous. But I mean, that said, I think much of the practical advice can definitely be implemented at brownfield sites nonetheless. And even for operators who aren't particularly near to deploying 5G, I think they can still be implementing lots of the practical advice. There's obviously some that is maybe not as applicable. I think especially if you have infrastructure which is near the end of its life cycle, then it's not going to be that beneficial to rip it up and replace it, either from a cost point of view or from an emissions point of view. But I think the recommendations that are applicable really to all operators, no matter where they are on their kind of 5G journey, is the kind of recommendations to leadership. So Nilmar kind of addressed some of these, and I think Scott alluded to them as well, but implementing top-down sustainability targets, actually attaching people's bonuses and salaries to these targets, actually then adjusting departmental budgets so they can achieve these targets as well. All of these things can be applied, to any operator really, whether they're beginning their 5G journey or not. And they could even be introduced, somewhat incrementally. And for operators that are, 5G deployment is not until the kind of medium or longer term for them, at least they'll have begun to build towards what is best practice, and then they should be prepared for the challenge that 5G will present.
Great, thanks, Matt. I only have a minute left, so Phil, if you could give a 1-minute answer to this question that we've had from Gareth, which is, has anyone quantified the amount of energy that can be saved where 5G is a facilitator to other industries, that is not 5G itself, but as a means to reach climate goals?
Yeah, so a lot's been done, and we've done it too. A lot of reports have been produced on this enablement factor, and I think it's good, and it's good to point out that 5G can help to improve these coordination aids that we talked about earlier. I would just say you have to be a bit careful with this, because you can end up just focusing on the positives, and that's a bit lopsided. And you don't want an operator to think, oh, because I'm enabling others, I don't have to do best practice myself. That's not on. So I'm just a little bit guarded. By all means, there are opportunities to improve efficiencies and performance and to optimize energy for others through the use of 5G, but that mustn't become an excuse not to do your own homework and to be best practice implementers yourselves. In fact, I would say it necessitates one to be credible at providing the other.
Great, thank you, Phil. Unfortunately, we've come to time. Just a reminder, thank you to all of the audience who have submitted questions. We'll do our best to get back to you offline, and we'll be sharing the presentation and recording with all registrants afterwards. So that just leaves me to say thank you to all of our presenters and panelists, and thank you to Virtiv as well, who've sponsored this research. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Ria. Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Bye.